Hope you're having a great day out there, everyone. Welcome back to Firechild Video. I'm your host, Chad Allen, and today we've got a super Blender tutorial for you. I'm actually taking a step back in time with this one. 2 years ago, we uploaded our very first Firechild tutorial, and it was covering an opening title effect in After Effects, similar to the opening titles of the iconic Superman graphics, or The Last Starfighter, or many other films from that era, but obviously Superman is the most memorable. We're going to show you how to make an opening title similar to that, well, I mean, you're seeing it on your screen right now. I can talk all I want, but I think the visuals speak louder than anything I can say, so that's what we're going to be creating. Let's go ahead and get into it right now and not waste any time. So here we are in our Blender default scene. Also, quick side note, if you're hearing a lot of pops or hisses in my audio, it's because I don't have a pop filter as of yet. I've ordered one, but haven't quite gotten it in yet. So just bear with the pops for now. Things will be getting better in the near future. So that being said, let's dive right into Blender and get started. Here we are in our default scene. We're not going to need our cube, so we can go ahead and select it, hit X, and delete it. And the same thing for our light. So just right click it, X, and delete it. So now if we hit 7 to go into top view and hit 5 to toggle orthographic, using the number pad, by the way, we can go and start creating our first material, well, our only material, or our only mesh, which is going to be Shift A. We go down right here is a text. So we'll just click that, and there is our text. Now to edit it, we just hit Tab to go into edit mode, and then backspace. And I know what a lot of you might be thinking at this point. This is the second Superman themed tutorial I've done, so I've got to be a huge Superman fan, right? Well, that's not really the case. I'm a big fan of the opening graphics and the opening credits from the film. They were beautiful. They were pioneering of their time. But as far as Superman goes, you know, he's not the strongest. In fact, you know, that's how it would go down. Just like that. Hulk smash, baby. That's just the way it is. I've probably got a whole lot of fanboys pretty upset with me right now, but hey, you know, I stick by what I say. I think the Hulk could take him any day. Enough geeking it up. Let's go ahead and let's do a real text here, and we'll just call this Firechild. Like that. Okay, first thing we need to do is first thing I need to make a little room here. Thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to change our font, because the default Blender font, it's not that good. So if we go to our font tab right here, and we go down here to our font, we can click this folder and then pick our font. I'm using Arial Black. You can pretty much use any font you want, but I find that the blockier type fonts, is blockier even a word? Well, it is now. Blockier type fonts seem to work better for this effect. Of course, if you want to do the research and find out what font was actually used in Superman or The Last Starfighter or any of those other movies, you're more than welcome to do that. This will work with any font. I just thought it bared mentioning. So Arial Black is what I'm using. Now, the next step, since we're trying to imitate, the next step is to create an outline of our text and not have a fill. Now, this is a tip that can be used in more than, any design that you would need text with an outline. I can think of dozens of reasons to do this, but for our case, we're going to do it. You don't have to. The effect will still work if you want filled text, but we're trying to create a certain look, so let's go ahead and make our outline. How we're going to do that is it's actually pretty simple. We're going to need to add a curve, so we can hit Shift A, and we can go curve, circle. Now this is very important because there is a mesh. If you look under mesh right here, there is a mesh circle. Now mesh circle will not work for what we're about to do. It has to be a curve circle. So that's very important. So create our curve circle. We're going to move it up out of the way. Excuse me. And we're going to scale it down. Now we're not going to render this. This isn't going to be part of the render. This is only basically really going to be sort of a modifier for our text. Now the next thing we need to do, with our text selected is we can leave it at text, but I find it is a little less glitchy. Every once in a while, if you leave this as text when you apply the next move, it can create some problems or just a little glitch, I guess, inside of Blender. So for me, the best way to do this is to convert this text from a font into a curve. So that's real easy to do. All we have to do is select our text, hit Alt-C, and it brings up this menu, and we want to, excuse me, I can't talk today. We want a curve from mesh text. So click that, and now if we go into edit mode, you'll see that we've got a curve instead of, you know, our font. So that's exactly what we want. Now, how to create the outline? Well, real simple. With our word selected, we can go under our curve menu here, or what's it called? Object data menu here. And we can scroll down, and you'll see there's a box right here where my cursor's at called bevel object. Now, bevel object, what that's going to do, it's going to use the circle to determine this bevel. So we're going to use this to give it the edge. So we'll just click it, select our curved circle, and watch what happens. We've got, you know, just an outline with no fill, but it's really thick. It's just way too thick. So to fix that, we'll just select our curved circle, hit S, and scale it down till we get something we like. Something right about there is pretty good. You know, adjust it to your liking. All right, so now we've got our word set up. The next step is just going to be materials and animation and, you know, jump into the compositor a little bit. But first, let's go ahead and set up our camera. So in top view, let's zoom out a little bit. I'm going to hit Control-Alt-0. And that's really all there was to it. Our camera is now snapped into the top view, and we're good to go. So camera's set up. All right, let's go ahead and take our curved circle and just move it to another layer. All I did was select the curved circle and then hit M on the keyboard, and I'm just going to move it to another layer just so it's out of the way. What's next? Next step. Okay, let's do... Wow, there's so many ways I can go here. Let's do the, before we do the extrusion, actually no, let's set up the extrusion right now because I'm sure you're looking at this extrude modifier here under geometry. Well, you'll see if I bring it up, it's pointless to use because now we have this bevel object and that's preventing it from working properly, so don't even bother trying that. So, how are we going to extrude our text? Well, all we're going to need is a simple modifier. So we go to our modifiers panel, which is the wrench right here. Add modifier, simple deform. And when I put that on, you'll see, let me go into camera view, you'll see we get this twist effect. And we're getting that because the mode over here is set to twist. And we don't want it to twist, we want it to stretch. So if we click that, you'll see there's twist, bend, taper, and voila, stretch. So we'll click that, and immediately our text bumps way over here, which is not what we want at all. That's because the stretch modifier is working on the X, Y, and Z axis. And we want to lock the X and lock the Y and only stretch along the Z axis. That's why we put our camera in top view, right? So we'll go ahead and lock the X, lock the Y, and if we come over to the side here, you'll see, oop, a little too much. You'll see, what am I doing? Things are running a little slow with the screen recording. So there we go. You'll see we're starting to get some stretch. And if we increase this factor, let's see, the maximum we're going to go is about 4. So we'll increase it to 4, and you see, there we go. Now we're starting to get a cool stretch. Let's go back into camera view. And now what we can do is we can set up our camera the way we're going to want it, because we know we want the text to start off way off in the distance and then fly past the camera and extrude as it does so. So I just grab the text with G, move it up towards the camera, and then now I can grab the camera, position it right to where it goes right down the center of the C. Grab the text, G, Z, constrain it to the Z axis, and there we go. That's exactly what we want. So let's drop it back. And for now, while we're going to do the animation, let's make some room here. Let's go ahead and disable, or at least turn the factor down to 0 for our simple deform. And we'll actually rename this just so it's easier to see. We'll name it stretch. Actually, we'll name it extrude. Oh no, stretch is better. Stretch. So now we know that that's our stretch effect. Let's bring it over so we can see it a little better. So there's our stretch. Okay, now let's animate our text, and then we'll worry about adding that stretch to it. So we want to start off at frame 1 over here. We want to drop it back on Z, way off in the distance. And if we go ahead and hit I, we can add a keyframe for location. And then we can go up to about 35 frames or so. and hit G and Z. Bring it, whoa, okay. Bring it up to about, say there, maybe about there. You can play with it later. Hit I, create a location keyframe, and then I only want this animation to be about 100 frames. I'll leave it up to you guys to time out your animation however you see fit, but mine's gonna be at about 100. So now we'll go ahead and go up to 100 frames, hit G and Z, and I'm dragging, but I'm holding down Shift, so it goes a little slower. But now all I wanna do is bring it till it just passes the camera. And when we do our next step, you're gonna see, let me hit I, create a location keyframe. You're gonna see that we're gonna need to modify that keyframe a little bit when we add our stretch. So let's go back to about 35 frames where I created this keyframe, because this keyframe at 35 is where I want the stretch to begin. So it's actually gonna come out kind of fast. Let's hit Alt A. Gonna come up fast and then slow down a little bit as it passes the camera, which is fine because that's where the stretch is going to begin. So it's kind of an optical illusion a little bit. Okay, so let's add our stretch. Now, our stretch is determined by the deform factor here in our simple deform modifier, right? But now one thing I struggled with as a beginner is how do I animate that? How do I animate these different things without going into was it IPO curves or any of that mess, which can be pretty confusing for beginners. There's a simple way to animate that, and that way is, there's actually several ways to do it, but one quick and easy way is to hover your cursor over deform, hit the letter I, and you'll see the color changes, and we've actually just created a keyframe at that position. So if we go forward to about, I guess about 50, and then extrude it to our max, which we said earlier was going to be 4, and you'll see, bam, there it is. Now remember, hover your cursor over, hit I, you just created a keyframe at that position for that value. So now if we look, it comes out, it stretches, and it passes the camera. Now that's exactly what we wanted. So let's just bring it to about right there. And if we render right now, see what happens. You're not getting anything. In fact, the background looks horrible. You're not getting any light, but that's because we deleted our lights earlier because we're gonna set up our own light setup. First thing we need to do though, if you noticed in the preview a little earlier, let me pop it up here again. See, if you notice in the preview, we have a star field in the background, and we want to create that star field in Blender without having to do it, in a third party. So let's go ahead and set up our background now. If we click on our World tab, let me just exit out of that. Click on our World tab, we can change the horizon color here to black. And if we go down to the bottom here, you'll see an option called Stars. Now, if we turn that on, you'll see in our viewport, we've got a bunch of dots, and you'll see our dots here, but those are just way too big for me. So let's make a little bit better star field. We're going to set this down about 0.05. Let's see, distance to about 20. And separation, you know what, let's set it all the way down to 2. Now we got a whole bunch going on over here now, but if we render, you see now we've got a pretty good looking star field. It's real basic. I mean, I'm not going too in depth on the star field because the font is actually the focus of this tutorial. I could do an entire tutorial on just creating a space scene, but this will work for what we're doing here. So that is pretty good. Let me go ahead and Control S, and let's save that to the desktop. We'll call it Super Blender Tutorial. All right, just make sure it's saved. Okay, so we've got our stars set up. I'm actually going to turn the stars off for right now, just so it doesn't clutter up our scene. I'll have to remember to turn those back on at render time. But next step, we need to go ahead and, well, actually, before we material, let's go ahead and do some lighting, and let's get our lighting set up. So if we go into top view, actually go into side view, what we can do is we're going to light this with area lamps. So if we hit Shift A, add a lamp, and add an area lamp. And then we can drag that over here, rotate it 90 degrees, and then go into our light settings, which is this tab right here. We can drop the distance down, just click and drag it to the left, and you'll see that line coming in, and we want it to just hit our stretch here, our words. And that's pretty good for that. We can change it into a rectangle and increase the size of the Y. Because remember, our text is starting way back here and flying up past the camera, so we're going to need a broad opening. If we go into front view, we can position this right here, and then we want it to stretch across the word, so increase the X. And that's pretty good. Now, this isn't the perfect lighting setup for all scenarios. In fact, it probably wouldn't work for most scenarios, but it does seem to work in this case. So we can duplicate that by hitting Shift D, then drag it over to the other side, R180, enter, and then just position it in place like so. And we can add one more by hitting Shift D and dragging this one up above the camera, rotate it, hold down Control and drag, and it'll snap right there. And then we can drop the Y, and that looks pretty good. Alright, so there we go. So now if we render, you'll see we've got some lit text, and it doesn't look quite right just yet, but bear with me, it's getting better, because now we're on to materials. So let's go ahead and select that. We'll go to our materials tab, we'll click new, and we're going to name this super text. Now, it's the only material we're creating for this tutorial, but it's a good habit to get into to label your materials. Always label your materials. Let's go ahead and give it a color. Now, I'm just picking some random colors, some completely random colors. So don't think that these are the only colors that you're going to have to use, but I'm picking, you know, a darker color for the diffuse and a lighter color for specular. Okay, now we can change the diffuse from Lambert, however you pronounce it, to minaret, or however you pronounce that one. I'm bad with pronunciations, guys. Then we can go down to specular and change that one to tune, and you'll see why in a minute. We'll increase the intensity a little bit, and maybe decrease the size just a tad. Something like that, and give it a little translucency. Not too much, we don't want to go overboard here. And we want it to be semi-transparent, so we're going to put on transparency, go down here, and we're going to knock the alpha in half, so to 0.5. And you'll see we've got some semi-transparency here. Let's see what it looks like when we render. See, now that's looking pretty good. Of course, our star field is missing, but that's because I turned it off, if you remember, a little earlier. So we'll remember to turn that back on at render time. But first, let's go ahead and do a little simple compositing. We're going to add a little bit of a glow. Now, probably not the same way you've probably seen in other tutorials, but this is just kind of a quick on-the-fly way, just to kind of get you familiar with the compositor and to create the effect we're after. Real simple. All we have to do is go right here, go to our node editor, and then we want to click right here on compositing nodes, tell it use nodes, and backdrop. Now we don't see anything. The backdrop is so that as we're working, we'll be able to see the effect of what we're doing on the final image. Now we don't have anything yet because we need to tell the node editor what our final image is, or what our rendered image is. So we just need to render again. So just hit F12 and let it render. And there we go. Now it's rendered. We can hit escape, and if you notice right here, our image is there. We can add an output node now by hitting Shift A, go output and viewer, and if we connect our render layer to our viewer node, you'll see now we can see it in the background, which is exactly what we want, so that's good. So first thing we need to do, let's go ahead and Shift A and add, I think it's under filter, yes, blur. Let's add a blur. Let's connect it to our render layer here, and then let's blur it, say about 15. No need to go crazy. Alright, so now it's blurred, but what we want to do is we want to mix it with our render layer. So we want this image and this image to mix together. And I say the word mix because that's exactly what it is. If we go under color, we've got mix. We can add a mix node there, and we can connect this here, and then connect our render layer there, and then change from mix to add, and then we can play with the factor a little bit, give it more or less. That's actually probably too much. But you know what, we'll leave it like that for now. And we've actually got a pretty good look going on. I mean, that looks pretty slick. You know, if I do say so. We could stop there if we wanted to, but I'm just going to give it just a little more control here. We're going to move this, make us some space, disconnect that for now, and let's add a RGB curves to our mix. And then we can do this, bring it down some, bring that up a little bit. And just play with that until you get something that you like, because that looks pretty good too. And lastly, I think we can probably get away with adding one more blur and one more mix, one more level of each. So we can grab that, and hit Shift D, drag these two over. Just need to make a little room here. All right, disconnect that, and we're going to connect our RGB curves to the blur. And then what we want to do is connect this mix node to this mix node, and then connect this to our viewer so we can see it. And we want to drop our blur down to about 6 or 7, somewhere in there. 6. And we've already got it connected, but now we need to bring our factor down a whole bunch. In fact, you know, we might even reverse the order. No, bad idea. Let's reverse it back. Okay, so there we go. Now, you could leave that second blur and mix out of the picture altogether, and you'd still have a really good look. By adding it, you make this brighter look, which we can even tone down the brightness just a little bit by adding another RGB curves to the mix. And just add it in here. You know, I might be going completely overboard here, but hey, this is a learning experience for all of us. If you remember, I started blending with a noob, so what does that tell you? Bring that down and just kind of flush it out to where we can see it a little better. And that right there, hey, that looks pretty good. You could go ahead and animate that. Just remember, before you leave the node editor, we need to connect our last node, this one right here, to our composite. Otherwise, when it renders, it's not going to render it out. So there we go. Now it's going to render. Hit F12. And you'll see when it renders, it's going to render our basic scene first, and then it's going to add the composites at the end. And there you have it. I mean, now that's a pretty simple, pretty interesting effect. If it was animated, which I'm not going to make you sit through this animation process, but if it was animated, you would see some pretty cool stuff going on. Pretty easy effect, pretty simple. You got a little intro into the node editor. Hopefully learned a few little interesting techniques along the way, how to make the outline text. So even if you're not a Superman fan, there's still something for everybody. That being said, I'm just going to say one last time that I still think the Hulk would take him, and if you want to start a flame war, there is a comment section right below this video. Let me know what you think, Hulk or Superman, who would take